The DJI Ronin M is one of the most iconic gimbals since its creation in 2015. So, 7 years later, is this gimbal still relevant? So over the past few years, I've really started diving into videography, and it actually all started with drones. I really loved drones and I loved seeing the footage they can get, and eventually it led me into handheld or just, normal videography. And a few months after I bought my first camera, I bought the DJI Ronin S2, and that was around 2 years ago. And since then I fell in love with everything that a gimbal gives you, just endless opportunities to film stuff. And since that point, I've used various gimbals and have got to experience different setups, and I'd like to see how those compare to the DJI Ronin M. And recently I actually sold that gimbal. That was my first gimbal. I sold it and I got a DJI Ronin M, and I'll explain why at the end of the video. But I want to go into different gimbals because over the past 2 years I've got to experience many different gimbals, and I've been able to see the pros and cons of each one. And I'm going to start with my personal rig, which is the DJI Ronin S2, as I talked about earlier. And the main reason I bought this thing was because it was cheap, and the price, I forget what it was at the time. I think it was like $600 for the Pro combo, and I paid like $500 because I got it used. But it was cheap, and I enjoyed that fact because I didn't want to buy something expensive if I didn't know what I was really getting into. Now it's also a con because the build quality was also kind of cheap. I didn't have any issues with stuff breaking, but you could definitely tell it wasn't up to par with their recent gimbals. It just wasn't that great of an experience. And they marketed it towards lighter cameras, and at the time I had a Sony a6400 with like a cheap little kit lens, so it was light and it was perfect because the gimbal is light, and it just worked out perfectly. But as I upgraded my camera, which I think last year I got Sony a7 III, and a few months ago I got the Sigma 28-70 2.8, and that's a heavy lens, so at that point the gimbal could not hold the weight. The only issue I had with it is occasionally it would have a joystick error and it would start just randomly tilting up, and I got really annoyed with that after a while. And obviously you can like fix that and calibrate, and I did that many times, but it would still have the error occasionally, so that kind of bugged me. And the other thing is it's a very responsive gimbal, which is perfect if you're filming, like somebody talking or like vlog style or anything like that. It's perfect for that. And in the settings you can tweak that and slow it down, speed it up, whatever. But it doesn't have the right cinematic feel in my opinion. Now if you walk correctly with it, which you should do with any gimbal, you can kind of get that, but there's still a little bit of movement even if it's balanced perfectly. But overall it was a pretty good gimbal and I was happy with it. And the next one, which is like I guess the older brother, is the DJI Ronin S. So that's the older S, the first one. That gimbal is a nice gimbal, but it had some of the same issues as the SC. Now the build quality was a lot better, I was happy with that, but it was the same thing with the responsiveness. It just was a little bit too responsive no matter how much you tuned it, and any little twitch it would start to move. Now it wasn't jerky, it wasn't like it was just randomly panning, but you could tell that it just was paying attention to every move, which for some filming is perfect, you want that. But for the stuff I was doing, I didn't really want that. And for that as well, I did have some joystick issues when I used it. Now this was a friend, so I only use it every so often, but it was very limited, but occasionally there would be a joystick error, which seems to be kind of common with the DJI Ronin S's and SCs, not sure why. Overall, I thought it was a pretty solid gimbal. And the next one after the DJI Ronin S is the DJI Ronin S2, which my work actually has, and they got it, I don't know, a few months back, and I've been using that, and it is super nice. Build quality, I think it's amazing. It's better than any other gimbal I've used. It's just a solid gimbal. It's got that touchscreen. It's got the extra bar if you want to go kind of like into low mode. It makes it super easy. So far over the past few months, I've had no issues with that thing. It's handled anything I've thrown at it. You can literally do anything with it. But again, going back to that responsiveness issue, I think that's just kind of DJI's thing, and it's perfect for the type of filming I do at work. Now, if you're filming like really slow stuff, might not be the thing for you. Now you can tune it, and I have done that extensively, and you can get it to a pretty manageable amount, but there's still a little bit of room for error there. But in the end, that's actually not that big of an issue. I'm just kind of nitpicking right now, but overall it's a great gimbal. And the last gimbal is the Moza Aircross Ii. Again, I use that at work, and I love that thing. Now I had a few issues with it, but I loved it. First off, it was so smooth. You could do anything. You had to really mess up to make that thing twitch or do anything weird. It was just a very smooth gimbal, and you could make as many airs as you want from walking to sprinting or whatever, and it would pretty much hold it. My big issue with that thing though was build quality. It was a little bit more plasticky than DJI's, and it just seemed a little bit cheaper build quality. I never really had any issues with it. It was my boss's gimbal. He used it probably more than me, but the only problem was towards the end of its life, there's some battery issues and it would just die randomly, but that could have been the batteries. I don't know. So how does the Ronin M compare to all these gimbals? And again, I've only had the Ronin M for about, I'd say 2 or 3 weeks now, but I've had some experience behind it, and so far I love it. So the pros, first of all, it's very smooth. It is literally probably the smoothest gimbal I've ever used. Moza is probably they're probably pretty close in that. It is just so smooth with everything. You can run, you can sprint, you can walk weirdly, and it just takes anything. And as you probably saw last week, I posted a camping trip video where I took the Ronin M out for a spin, and I was so lazy with it, I would just sprint and I wouldn't even try to keep myself stable. I would just go for it, and it handled it pretty well. But there's still a little bit of airs, as you can see in the video. There's a little bit of shakiness, but it wasn't terrible for what I was doing. So again, super smooth. The second thing is it's super reliable, which I have not tested this fully yet. Again, 2 or 3 weeks. This is actually a used gimbal, so I mean that can say something too. But I've heard that these things will not die on you. They won't do anything. They won't have motor failures or issues. They're just a really solid gimbal to have. But I also believe that because just handling it, it is a really solid gimbal. And another reason is it is great for low angles. And that's kind of the reason I bought it, which may sound weird, but I love filming cars and doing car videography, which I want to start getting into again. It's very easy to do low angles with this thing because the handle on top, and you can just get super low and get really cool angles with it. And again, it's super smooth, so you don't have to really worry about weird footage. Like if you're doing handheld with like a Ronin S or something, you really got to be weird with it to get low, and then you got to worry about the footage. I always had that issue, but this thing you don't have to worry about. And it follows movement amazingly. Now obviously you do have to, follow the movement. It's not like the current gimbals where you have the active track, but it does follow insanely well. You can just kind of track, and it's just stable and it just looks good. And that's just one thing I found that just makes it easy to follow movement. So on to the cons. There's actually a lot of cons, but some of them I really don't care about. And the first one, it's heavy, and that can be a pain in certain circumstances. Obviously it's a bigger actual gimbal, there's a bigger area, and you got all those handles and the bar, and it gets heavy with the rig on it. So that is an aspect you have to keep in mind. So because it's heavy, it is harder to take long videos with that thing. Let's say you're filming somebody talk, it would be kind of a pain because you have to hold it up here, and your arms probably get tired. It's not like a single one where you can just do one or the other. It is a little bit more tiring than that. One thing I really don't care about is the joystick. There's no joystick and there's no modes with this thing. Now you can tune how the motors react and like the deadband and stuff like that, but there's no like on the gimbal buttons to change the modes. It just doesn't have that. It's old technology, but I personally don't mind that. One thing I might miss is the modes. I would play with those a little bit with the DJI gimbals, the newer ones obviously, but this one does not have that. And the joystick I really never use unless I had to like slightly adjust the shot, but in that case for the stuff I'm doing, I just take a new shot anyways, because the joystick movements were always a little bit jerky. So to me, that doesn't really matter. And because of how complicated it is, it does take longer to set up even if you've pre-balanced your gimbals. With the newer gimbals, if it's pre-balanced, you just slide in, make sure you hit that right point, and you're good to go. And with this thing, you can do the same thing, but if you tear it down, you got to put the rods back together, you got to put the handles back on, and it is a little bit of a longer process, which can be pain if you want to film quick, which to me, that actually might matter a little bit, because sometimes I do like to just quick go out and film something, so that might make that a little bit tougher. And the last thing is a personal preference, but it's kind of a necessity in my opinion. You need a monitor, and I don't have one yet. I'm about to go get one, but the reason you need a monitor is with this setup, it really blocks your screen for the camera, because even if you fold it out, and in most cases you can't fold it out depending on how your gimbal is set up and or balanced, but you really need a monitor up on top so you can watch that, because otherwise your screen is blocked and you're just kind of guessing, which I had to do a lot of on last trip. But after all those cons, why would I buy the DJI Ronin M? Well, let's take a step back and talk about why I sold my SC. And the first reason was, which I already alluded to, is my camera setup was just too heavy for it. And my old lenses, they're kind of like kit lenses and they're just not that great. So I really wanted to get better quality footage, but I couldn't with that gimbal. So for that reason, I kind of had to sell it if I wanted to get better footage. The second reason is I wanted something smoother. With doing car videography and stuff like that, where I'm, hanging out the back of vehicles or whatever, I want something smooth to get those rollers and just really crispy shots like that. I don't have something that is kind of just slowly moving around. I want something just rock solid, smooth, and looks really nice. The last reason is kind of weird, but it's true. I got used to better quality equipment after using like the Ronin S's, the Ronin S2s, and the Moza. It was just, you could tell there's a difference with filming quality. It was just easier, and you didn't have slight issues as far as joysticks and stuff like that. It was just a lot easier, and I like that aspect of not having to deal with other garbage when you're filming something. So I was just kind of ready to sell it and get a new gimbal. So the moment you've all been waiting for, is the DJI Ronin M still relevant in 2022? Again, 7 years later, is it still a relevant piece of technology? And usually I'd probably say no, because 7 years ago in the terms of technology is like ancient. But for this, I would have to say yes, it is still relevant. And the number one reason why I think it's still relevant is it's smoother and less responsive than current DJI gimbals. And I am a little bit of a DJI fanboy. Sadly, they are made in China, but I think their quality is amazing and they make really great stuff. So I tend to compare stuff to DJI. And it's a good thing that it's smoother and less responsive if you're into cinematography and, car videos or anything like that where you just want something super smooth. It's perfect for that. But if you're the person who likes to do vlogs or you film people, it's probably not for you. It's a little bit uncomfortable and I probably wouldn't recommend it for you. It's probably just not relevant for you. And it also has just lasted the test of time. I mean, it's 7 years later. I gotta use gimbal. It works fine. I haven't had any issues with it so far. And other people have always said the same thing, that Ronin M's are just the best as far as build quality. So I think that's another aspect that should be taken into consideration. So I know this was a little bit of a different video, but if you want to see more videos like this, let me know. Usually I'm talking about the Scout or the FJ or going on trips, but I know this is different. So let me know what you think. If you have more ideas or suggestions, hit me in the comments and we can get those out for you if you talk about gear, whatever you want. So thanks for watching. Do what you got to do down below and see you in the next one.